Monday. Welcome to the Advance. I'm Michael Quinn Sullivan, publisher of Texas Scorecard. Glad to be sitting down with you and with my colleague, Brandon Waltens, the senior editor of Texas Scorecard. Brandon, how was your weekend?
Oh, it was great. I mean, if maybe people took I don't know if people took a few days to maybe not think so much about the primary elections. We're already talking about runoffs. We'll be talking about them this morning as well. But it was good to get a few days of time to sort of rest there.
Okay, so let's talk about runoffs for a second. Got to talk about runoffs, particularly, last week sort of ended in this weird jumble of President Trump saying that he's going to endorse someone, and that he in the U.S. Senate race, and that he's going to then ask the other person to not run. Ken Paxton came out very quickly and said, "I'm not dropping out of the race." Donald Trump said, "Oh, that might be bad for him." I felt like I was watching an anniversary edition of The Apprentice or something, that who's auditioning to get fired. Where do you think we are in all this at the moment?
Well, Michael, it's tough to tell. I mean, keep in mind, this happened Tuesday night. Of course, we have the results in that Senate race that everybody had been watching. And you had John Cornyn outperforming, I think, expectations, right? In the sense that he came in just narrowly in first place. So going to a runoff against Ken Paxton, but a lot of people expected, and a lot of the polls predicted as well, that he would have been further behind, a further second place behind Ken Paxton, that Ken Paxton would have gone into the runoff race leading. That wasn't the case. And so what we've seen happen since then is you had President Trump on Wednesday, the next day, making the announcement that you mentioned that he would be endorsing in that race. A lot of people reading that to believe that he probably would be inclined to endorse John Cornyn based off of the fact that, John Cornyn is the sitting senator. There's legislation that the president wants to get through, and that maybe this is part of some negotiations for some more immediate things that the president would like to have happen in the Senate. The response from Attorney General Ken Paxton was very interesting, right? He sort of went out there and said, "Okay, look, I'll drop out of the race if the Senate allows the standing filibuster and allows the Save America Act to pass." This all happening Wednesday, Thursday of last week. And essentially, I think it's an interesting proposition, right? Because the president, and throughout this last weekend, has made clear that this is his top priority right now. In fact, he went out there on True Social this weekend and said he won't sign any other Senate bills until the Save America Act comes to his desk, which deals with election integrity as well as preventing child gender mutilation. Those two things comprise the bulk of the Save America Act. And this is something that I don't know if the Senate can actually deliver on. John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, has been out there and essentially said that this is something that he doesn't think is going to happen, that he doesn't think even, the Republican senators have the appetite for. And so the question right now for the president is, okay, well, do I endorse John Cornyn and hope that something might be able to happen on the Save America Act? Or is there any real reason for him to endorse Ken Paxton? Or what maybe seems increasingly likely is maybe he steps back and says, "Okay, maybe I won't endorse in this race." I don't know what'll happen. I think there are sort of varying likelihoods of some of these options. But I think regardless of what happens, Michael, what I have been really interested to see is polling, and again, polling all with a grain of sand, has shown even in recent days that a Trump endorsement of John Cornyn specifically might actually have very little effect on the outcome of a runoff election, especially given the people who make up the electorate in a runoff election, which tends to be a smaller group than primary races. Less people vote in a runoff. They tend to be more motivated. And I think a lot of people that went to the polls earlier this month to go vote against John Cornyn are probably not going to be persuaded simply because of an endorsement from the president.
It is, I would argue, impossible to underestimate just how important this this narrative shift that Ken Paxton did with his announcement. Because generally, when we see these cats, they're going into a runoff, 100% all the time, it's about me, 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 me. The me monster emerges. I mean, that's just general politicians,
Yeah.
elections, but particularly in a runoff where everything has to be all about the candidate. And that's understood. I mean, it's high stakes. It's, this is big, important stuff. And yet here's Ken Paxton saying, okay, Mr. President, you want to talk about an endorsement? You want to talk about people dropping out of the race? I'll drop out of the race. You just got to deliver, not on, a cushy appointment to some, island nation somewhere as their token ambassador where you get to sit and drink, little umbrella drinks all day long. No. He pushed for a substantial policy change. As you said, the biggest thing that President Trump has been pushing on now for weeks, including now over the weekend, that, from what I've heard from various friends in Washington, completely upended the cushy little gang of 535 where, okay, the House will go vote for the thing. Remember, they've got elections every 2 years. The Senate, they can afford to not vote on things because their elections are 6 years. So we just won't vote. But they they protect each other. And here is Ken Paxton saying, hey, you guys can protect John Cornyn. I will go along with protecting John Cornyn. All you got to do is do what the American people want. And that's the last thing these senators want to do. I mean, it is a significant step that Ken Paxton made to completely rewrite how the next, 73 days plays out.
Well, and consider this. I mean, look, anything can happen at any moment. Trump could come out and endorse John Cornyn this afternoon. I don't know what could happen. But keep in mind that the president put this statement out on Wednesday. I think a lot of people expected an announcement to come maybe even later that day, if not Thursday. Friday seemed maybe kind of late. Here we are now, on the next Monday. We haven't seen him talk about it yet. And I think that just that delay alone is very interesting. Keep in mind, we're actually coming up against, not immediately, but there is an actual deadline. Candidates can withdraw their name from the runoff, right? That happens after the official votes are canvassed, which I haven't seen the date set exactly yet, but is probably within the next couple weeks here, will be the deadline for when a candidate can drop out of the runoff. Which is probably a good segue here because we've already seen this happen in at least one high-profile race, a congressional race that was set to go to a runoff.
Yeah, I think that the Brandon Herrera coming in first place in that CD contest against Tony Gonzalez was significant. I think a lot of folks maybe expected Herrera would walk away, but remember, this is a race where that we've seen this movie before. The difference from 2 years ago, Tony Gonzalez, the incumbent, battered, bruised, still nonetheless emerged from that to win first place. So you kind of expect, okay, here's another rematch. We've seen this movie. But I think because of those last minute revelations about Gonzalez and the staffer who died from suicide, I think a number of folks, this is going to impact things. Well, one, news takes a while to permeate. Two, I think there is still some, kind of standoffishness among voters saying, hey, we just did this 2 years ago with the very same people. This time feels different. And clearly felt different to Tony Gonzalez because he dropped out.
Yes, yeah. Tony Gonzalez announced on Friday, actually, that after, initially he had said, like everybody, right? I think on Wednesday said he's heading into this runoff and he's gonna fight. And then fast forward a couple of days and he dropped out.
Driven in large part by the House Ethics Committee announcing an investigation.
When you had House Majority Leaders, you had Speaker Mike Johnson, and some others calling on him to drop his reelection bid, not to resign from Congress, but to just drop his reelection bid. Some have gone even further, even in Texas's own delegation, calling him to drop out entirely. But The fact that he did drop his reelection, but I think tells you that, first of all, I think the money that was there for him in 2024 was probably not going to be there for him this go around. But it's also, I think, a big win for, for Herrera, certainly, and his supporters. I mean, this is somebody who has now faced off against Tony Gonzalez, right, last time, and then faced him in a runoff, then faced him in the regular primary this year. I mean, certainly shows the benefit of perseverance on his part.
All right. While Republicans have had their kind of fun this past week with runoffs and dropouts and who's going to drop out, all those kind of things, it has been interesting to see the data dump coming out about James Tallarico. Folks learning just how weird and gross and radical he is. You and I have seen it because you're in the Texas legislature. There were a lot of Republicans. Oh, well, no, he's going to be tough to beat. He's a fine young Christian man. As it turns out, he does some weird stuff.
Oh, I don't know. Right. I mean, this is somebody who speaks at the front of churches and talks about how, Mary, God asked Mary for permission, to give birth to Jesus. He talks about there being 6 genders. Yeah, churches in air quotes. Yeah, if your churches are flanked with, rainbow flags and have a blue-haired, person leading it, probably not exactly the kind of churches most of y'all have, I would assume, go to. But talks about there being 6 genders. Talks about how atheists are more Christ-like than Christians. I mean, literally bizarre stuff. In fact, I saw somebody, I can't remember who it was, but as we've seen these clips now really start to get saturated on social media, somebody saying, hey, why don't we save some of this for November? It seems like there's maybe too much of this coming out now, but I'll tell you, they're doing a lot of work right now to define this race and to really define James Tallarico, somebody who I think, in contrast to Jasmine Crockett, who has obviously made a name for herself very quickly, lover or hater, right? James Tallarico, a little bit less defined, right? I mean, what does the average person know, the average Texan know about James Tallarico, other than this is this state representative who's from Austin, who, he's this white guy who's, kind of in his 30s, I think, and is running for representative. This is somebody who, had been on the Joe Rogan podcast, that he's appeared on cable news sometimes, but certainly didn't have the sort of reach that Jasmine Crockett did. But a lot of money came into this race for him, right. And that certainly helped, and we saw him pull this off. But now a lot of people, I think, learning exactly just how radical. A lot of people talked about James Tallarico being sort of the moderate in that race, but from watching him in Austin, he's anything but. I mean, this is not a moderate candidate.
Comparing Jasmine Crockett to James Tallarico, Crockett was actually, you got to shift everything to the radical left. She was more moderate than James Tallarico. And I think that's at some point, the Democrats and the general public will go, wait a second, what did the Democrats foist upon us? Now, look, neither one of them were their A-list candidate. Neither one was a B-list candidate. Neither one was a C-list candidate. They were like down into the, L list of candidates. The other thing, kind of a counterpoint to the folks saying, slow down on these release. What a friend of mine at the Republican National Committee noted was, no, we have to start getting stuff out now because there's so much. And because, look, this is what this guy's done. Tallarico's finances are a little odd. That comes from money, somehow has funded this, part-time legislative gig into a full-time gig traveling around the world. And there's just a lot of video out there of him rallying the far radical left. And I think that the little clippers and the opposition research teams have been overwhelmed by how much, because a lot of politicians don't have the kind of video presence that apparently James Tallarico and the kinds of churches he spoke at have. Okay, I want to shift gears for a second as we're kind of starting to hit on some clocks here. Let's talk a little bit about University of Houston. They've got a Board of Regents meeting coming up this week, kind of following UT, A&M, following, not meaning they're following the ships, but rather following because these regents kind of stagger their meeting times. they now looking at their curriculum.
Yeah.
I think we all knew last year, Brandon, that the legislation passed, the higher ed reform was going to be significant. I think that even I've been a little surprised by how significant these reforms have been, and honestly, how much good faith has been shown by the leadership of these institutions to try to do the right thing, or at least setting the stage for doing the right thing.
Yeah, SB 37, that was the omnibus college, reform bill that went through the session, was signed into law last year, requires these universities to do these course audits, to do these course reviews, and make sure that they're not teaching things that are not part of that, right? And we've already seen some successes from this. For example, right, Texas A&M University getting rid of their women's and gender studies major after it was revealed just how much woke ideology was in there, right? And they would say, well, there wasn't that many people in it. It wasn't necessarily part of the review, but I think it's unmistakable that this process and this fact that these universities are now legislatively required to go through and to actually make sure that their courses are compliant with state law is having an effect. And so Adam Kahn, of course, has been at all these boards of regents meeting. He's going to be following the University of Houston meeting as well.
And look, I just want to give credit where credit is due. There's a whole lot of parents, whole lot of tuition payers, whole lot of students who, for several years, have been complaining about the way the very expensive higher education has been used. They've had their money taken from them and used to beat them about the head and shoulders, indoctrinate them against their values and their beliefs. And this is a great example of where, if you will speak up, if you will rally with like-minded friends, the legislature will pay attention. Nothing sharpens the focus of the mind like a noose around the neck. And I think a lot of lawmakers felt like there was a noose coming around their neck for voters who were just fed up with seeing, institutions like Texas A&M, where they take just a very small number, they're becoming very, very exclusive, and jacking up prices, and yet still you see this kind of nonsense there. So, congratulations to a lot of students who recorded professors, who recorded interactions with university officials and other things in order to raise awareness, sometimes at risk to themselves and their academic careers and their professional lives, speaking out. So those kind of reforms don't happen overnight. And what happened with SB 37, now almost a year ago, passing, is because of folks spending several years make those calls. So pretty exciting stuff to see that the news cycle come to fruition there.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Brandon Waltens, thanks for today, and thank you for joining us on this edition.